Welcome to the Ambient iPad. In this video, it's the Mellotron meets Imaginando effects. On the Mellotron, I'm going to use two string sounds from the M300, and for Imaginando on the iPad, it's DLYM, which is a modulation delay, and K7D, a great tape delay. The signal chain is the Mellotron M4000D Mini. Its master mono analog output goes into a Boss volume pedal on the floor. The output from the volume pedal goes into the Boss RE202 Space Echo, and the stereo output from the Space Echo goes into a Universal Audio Volt 276 interface that communicates back and forth with the iPad Pro. For this video, I'm only going to be using the Space Echo for a little bit of looping at the beginning. I'll be using K7D as the tape delay. Why don't I run through first the Mellotron sounds without any effects, and then I'll run through all the different types of effects that I'm going to use. I have multiple instances of DLYM and one instance of K7D in each, and it'll be the same patch. So let's start with the Mellotron. I'll be using the M300, two string sounds, string A high and string A low. Let me make sure the volume pedals. So this is string A high. And then string A low, same chords. And let's put those together. So it's in mono, pretty much. I'm not going to use spatializer like I usually do because the Imaginando effects definitely add a little bit to the stereo field. So those sounds, it's not quite the classic Mellotron string sounds that you get from the Mark II or the M400. It's a little more realistic sounding. There's a lot of woodiness in it, and sounds actually like a little bit of kind of different emphasis on tones of getting a lot more cello and kind of viola in the M300 strings, at least for strings A, there's also strings B, than I typically get from the other Mellotron strings. All right, enough about the strings. Let's start with, I have a setup here in AUM. Very similar. The Mellotron comes in, goes into DLYM or DLYM, and then it will go into K7D as well. The one on the right here is just for the looping, so let me demonstrate those sounds. I've created a whole bunch of patches over time, and I'll be using those. This first one is called Hollow Mod, and you know what? I'll turn on K7D too. Let me just demonstrate what K7D will sound like. It's the same in both of these channels, and it's just kind of a basic tape delay I've created. K7D does a lot of wild, wacky stuff, all the Imaginando things do. And let me just go into a factory patch and bouncing fists. What does that sound like? That's just one example. I don't use K7D like that. I use it as a kind of traditional tape delay. And here's my basic tape delay sound. So that's good. I have some that are shorter decays, although that's got a nice stereo feel to it. And then I've got this very ambient one. Classic tape, what's that? So a lot of these are the same patch. All I've done is kind of tweak the decay a bit. That's a very long decay. This basic one, which I was going to use, I like that, but I'm not crazy that it's not in stereo. So let's go with that one, and then I'll have to change that in this instance as well, which will be more of the sounds as the loop is going. I think basic tape delay. All right, so let's keep that on back to Imaginando. So this is Hollow Mod, and I'll be using this for the loop. And I'll demonstrate the loop in a few. So that's that's the loop, which is only going to be for a little bit right at the beginning. And then over here, let's turn this instance off. And again, this is the Imaginando tape delay. Got to see that graphic going. Okay, I like that. You get that stereo sound. I'm using a bunch of different sounds here. This will be while the loop's going. It's staticky. I guess that's the best way, which is why I call it static. I'll be fading that in. I don't think I'll actually be playing much with that. Then this is kind of, let's close that. And this is a phaser sound. Call this Tron phaser. So I think you can already tell this is different than this kind of series I'm doing where the Mellotron meets different brands, applications, apps on the iPad. Typically I'll have some sequences going or some percussion, but for this it's really just more of an ambient Tron-scape, for lack of a better term. And instead of, I mean, I love the Mark II and M400 strings on the Mellotron. I could live forever just with that Mellotron sound and no other, but I use that a lot. So I figured, hey, let's try the M300 ones, which are very cool in their own right. So to move on, so that's going to be kind of the main part. I'm envisioning this as three. This is totally improvised, and I've just in my head kind of set up, oh, this is there's kind of three sections to this. There'll be a little bit of the looping with that static over it, and then we'll move into the phaser, and then at the end it's more of a, let me just play it. I call this patch inevitable because I have a piece on one of my albums that's called Inevitable, and it uses a very similar sound to this, although that was recorded on a Roland XP50, so completely different instruments. But this is that sound. So you get that movement in the background, that kind of step flange. At least for Roland, that's what that effect, it's a step flanger. So I like that. So just kind of briefly before I get into the jam, let me just get a, so I want to get that down to nothing. 0. Let's make sure that's on. Let me just do a quick little loop here and like zoom through some of the stuff I'm thinking about before we really get into it. So fade in on the loop. And I hear nothing. Nothing's coming out. And why is that? That's interesting. I know why, because this is down. And actually, it's already recorded. I turned the volume of the echo is down. Now let's just keep going here. And one more. Cover up that blank space. Okay, let's turn that off. And then, you know, we can kind of bring in the static. And then somehow I need to get to this other sound. I don't know how I'm going to do that. I mean, I could just fade that out and then bring that in, bring that out. We didn't have Imaginando on. Excuse me, it's all Imaginando, the K7D. I want to make sure that's on. All right, let's see what happens here. Now the loop's off, but it's still going to go through that sound. That's the problem. So, and then we could just kind of fade it as we go along. Not too abrupt. Believe me, during the jam I'll be a little more smooth about all this. And then kind of jam on this for a bit. And then I want to get into that last sound. And not really quite sure how I'm going to do that. Right now I'm just going to kind of go crazy here and turn it on, and here we are. All right, that's kind of the basic. You heard all the sounds, you heard the effects, you heard kind of the basic structure. And let me just reset everything in AUM to its original state, and I will do a jam. I really like working with sequences and percussion, but every now and then, particularly with the Mellotron, I like to do just kind of a nice, big, expansive Mellotron soundscape. And I limited myself to 2 effects. Usually with this series, the kind of Mellotron meets like Moog and Ice Gear, I'm using their synth apps, and Imaginando does have synth apps, and I have a couple of those, but I've always liked their effects, and I've liked that it's kind of a little perverse because when you download their effects, the factory patches, as I demonstrated earlier, they're really kind of wild. And I use some of those finally. I've never done that before. But I really like using them more straight ahead. I don't use DLYM that much, but I do use K7D all the time. I think it is an amazing tape delay. And to me, it rivals the RE202. Of course, people would argue, well, that's just a digital box anyways, which is true. But it definitely, whoops, sorry about that. It definitely has the DNA and a lot of the classic Roland Boss Space Echo stuff. I mean, they made the original unit, but K7D I highly recommend as a tape delay. And again, it was nice to use kind of different strings rather than the traditional Mark II or M400, which are just iconic and classic. The strings on the M300 remind me more of a chamber, a little bit more chamber music. The sound's drier, it's a little more upfront, so I thought it worked pretty well for this. So again, this was fairly improvisational. I would probably do some stuff differently, but when you jam or when you do an improv, that's a point in time, and believe me, it could have gone a lot worse. Thanks for watching, thanks for listening, and good luck with your own music.